distinguished guests from near and far, and dear Hugh. I'm going to talk about climate change and activism. And activism is very personal, so I'm going to be personal. And this is you who are inspiring me, Hugh. Talk about this. I want to begin by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to be here. It's always a pleasure to be at my old school in Uppsala, and especially away from Icelandic politics. My name is Helga Ögmundardottir. I'm an anthropologist from the University of Iceland, and I was lucky enough to have Hugh as my PhD supervisor for several years. I'm very thankful for his faith in my project, which route turned out to be windy and taking a little longer than originally planned. This is what happens when the world of scholarship and research does not match the real world of life and death. The former, your realm, where things take place on your premises, the latter sucking you in, dominated by forces you don't have any control over. Hugh, you know what I'm talking about. In my case, fieldwork and PhD writing became my refuge in a way, where I was in control, and Hugh played a bigger role in making it so than I realized back then. It is important for me to say this, and thank you for the support. Such opportunities are too rare and shouldn't be wasted. I was asked to speak here as a former PhD student of anthropology in Uppsala, and to address the issue of research and activism, changing epistemologies and identities and so on, as the program states. And this is the real title of my talk. Well, it's a work in progress, so it's changing every minute almost. It's a kind of a question. Am I lost or am I not? Perhaps I'll find myself after this talk. Instead of addressing a specific issue in my research, I decided to look back on the various projects I have worked on and put them all together in a way, see them as a field in a way. They have been about climate change effects on communities in the northern countries and circumpolar area, but they've also been about other issues, always with climate change as a kind of the big frame, the big context. These issues: energy and carbon emission, natural resources management, fragmentation of nature, etc., etc. I fortunately kept a good record of the communication and cooperation between me and the other researchers on the teams I've been part of. So I used my notes, my field notes, my diaries to go through, to prepare for this talk. And they show so clearly how often I've wondered about the anthropologist's position as standing between research and activism, between conflicting epistemologies of what is going wrong and what can be done about it. Between the researcher's perception, scientist perception, and the perception of the people out there in the field. And you were actually taking this thread up, Hugh, now in your last comment, so it's a nice continuation. The problem is increasingly of concern to me as the point of no return of climate change disaster seems to be around the corner, and urgency frames just about every interdisciplinary climate change research project, well, all the ones I am part of at least. How mitigation has kind of gone to the background, and now it's about adaptation, because we can't save ourselves otherwise than by adapting. We can prevent things that's already on way. The liminal position of the anthropologist is, in my experience, prominent in this type of research, where the overarching goal, not often made explicit, but still the underlying consensus, is to avert a disaster in the making, but the methods are more often than not framed and articulated by the physical and natural sciences. These projects I'm talking about, the ones I've been part of, are these 5-year, these big ones with budgets that I can't even imagine, naming the figures of 40, 50, 60 scientists physical natural scientists in majority, and then the add-ons, etc., etc. The role and position of the social and human sciences in these climate change research projects is much more unclear, and even more so in mitigation and adaptation. What are we to do? Besides, most often it is on the premises of and framed by the needs of the hard sciences to have a socio-cultural dimension in the project planning to fulfill criteria for funding, the political correctness of money. Not that the people I collaborate with, I want to give them that credit, from the natural sciences are ignorant or wary of the importance of culture and society, but the fact that we are more often add-ons to fulfill certain criteria for interdisciplinarity, gender balance, I'm both an anthropologist and a woman, so it's like, two flies in one smell. Methodological balance between qualitative and quantitative, etc., etc. This leaves me wondering what disciplines like anthropology are seen to have to offer in interdisciplinary research and the implementation of various measures against climate change. The ideas I put forward here are contemplations in the making, something I have only recently started putting into words. It's like looking back. I've been around for 15 years now on climate change research, so it's like I have something to, kind of digest. And I look forward to hearing your ideas and experience in this field. Our fields of interest, mine and my supervisors, overlapped nicely, and Hugh's approach to his field was a great inspiration for me, even if the animals we heard in the field and in our text are not the same. I want to keep this slide up so you have something nice to watch while I blabber on. But back to activism and research. My PhD research took place in a social setting in Iceland, my own country, that I was already a part of as a politically active person in local environmental organizations. Hugh immediately recognized that, and during our discussions, I became aware of and appreciated his potential, this potential of anthropology, at the same time trying to be conscious of its dangers and pitfalls, and actually went through some notes from our discussions about this, being the activist and being the researcher. A dangerous liaison. This dual role of the anthropologist in the field and in research context, not least in the one of the complex and politically chaotic interdisciplinary space of climate change, has turned out to be both the most important challenge and contribution to the project I've been working on in the last 50 years or so, but it's also the hardest to negotiate and explain to my collaborators from the natural and physical sciences. And that's one of the problems, what their expectation and what I think I'm doing. It's a strange, empty space there. The integration of such a role as both an in and an outsider, as both as a producer of knowledge and an active participant in the field, into the fabric of research, is, needless to say, a true challenge, because what I find appropriate to do and what is expected of me to do, does only fit in exceptional cases. We think we're speaking to each other, but it's like we're speaking beside each other. It's not least in the use and understanding of buzzwords like climate change, effects, adaptation, risk perception, mitigation, vulnerability, even the words we kind of take for granted. That keeps us apart. My natural and physical scientist colleagues understand them very differently, technically, normatively, as terms and functions or projects that we are to design and apply as tools to fix things. The anthropologist, on the other hand, needless to say, sees them as representing particular perspectives of worldviews which themselves have to be scrutinized and criticized. They cannot be taken for granted as they represent certain ideologies and epistemologies. On one hand, there's not only the gap between the anthropologists and even the other social scientists on the team, because I'm working with economists and people who are social scientists or even humanities people, but still we don't speak on a common ground. And my natural science colleagues, but on the other hand, I'm increasingly troubled by the gap between their agenda and understandings of how the world works and the reality of the people I do fieldwork with. And then I represent in our findings, when we come together and talk about what we have found out or where to go next. When the normative part of the climate change project is reached, perhaps 1 or 2 years into it, the anthropologists and other social and humanities researchers are in many ways expected to enter the scene, the add-ons, find out and explain what is that the people, the public needs to know, translate the real science to them, and help facilitating the needed transformation. Less emission, less energy use, blah, 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 sustainability. So we take on the work packages of qualitative data gathering, perhaps 2 or 3 packages, the communication and the public outreach, the initiating of the needed socio-cultural transformation they have prepared, my technical colleagues, the facts for and design for. This is what, they go out and they measure and model what climate change is about and its effects on the ocean and the atmosphere, on natural resources, buildings, infrastructure, herding, agriculture, industry, infrastructure. So the model is theirs, and we step into that world. So we go about our respective tasks, usually alone. I'm usually alone in the field for a far too short time to be able to really come to the core of cultures of energy and emission and values and habits of our carbon existence. That's one thing that's troubling me. We should do it very quickly, and our budget is always lower than the people with technologies. And the themes of focus in this project are usually how to reduce emission and energy use, increase sustainable behavior, reduce consumption and waste. All these mantras we hear all the time. So socio-cultural changes are almost seen as mechanical processes that just need a little push and pull here and there by experts and planners, and then everything is going to be fine. For societal outreach, communicating findings, or whatever the terms are used, there might be a PR person on the team, 2 of them even a company, that's kind of taking care of that. That should produce videos and blogs and digital products, but more often than not, the social scientists are the designers of this phase, or the ones who should take over by then. The public outreach, it's yours. Because we know how to deal with messy humans in their non-quantifiable everydays. But no, as an anthropologist, I'm not a social engineer. I'm not an enforcer of change in communities. That is not what the anthropological activists set out to do. And herein lies the problem. The gap between what my enthusiastic natural science collaborators plan for the project to facilitate and what I see as a researcher in the field, they don't match. It is not only the epistemological understandings of the role of science in society that differ here, but the entire perception of what the world is about, and how much science and research really can do to shape this future. That is be a kind of a fix. We have to fix the future. I remind my colleagues of how past experiments of enforced social and cultural transformations have turned out, and how planned behavior changes can end in a totally different place than desired, and often with unexpected and counterproductive outcomes. Discussions, more often than not, focus on how we think in the so-called developed world, how we think we are safe because we have technology, money, knowledge. But those already poor and marginalized are defenseless against the effects of climate change and in need of our rescue. The story is not a new one. The discourse is familiar, and it is as if the context of underdevelopment, colonialism, poverty, all these words we learn, have been replaced by the paradigm of climate change. Now everything is about climate change. And it's like we take away all the other things that really are, in my view, screaming more at me than even climate change. Well, I can't trivialize it, but still. I sometimes see my natural and physical science colleagues' self-realization change from being one of security, they're in control of things. After 5 years, they become more and more hesitant and even desperate when they realize that change is not at all about planning and design, physical structures, economic practices, and political talk. I was at a meeting with Michael Mann and Stefan Ramstorff just a few weeks ago, and when you over a beer, it comes out, they're like, oh my God, this is so hopeless. And when you see this gestalt there, these big guys with climate change, they kind of rule the scene there. And they're so desperate, it's just, yeah. Through the years, the social and human sciences roles in this interdisciplinary project have changed from being rather marginal, though there are changes taking place, to becoming more equal, and even totally equal, to what the natural sciences are to contribute, in the hope that something can actually be done, that research is not only an academic activity but a driver of change. But as I find this taking place, I feel lack of engagement and interest among too many of my colleagues in social sciences, anthropology and others. Anthropology in Iceland belongs to social sciences. It doesn't matter where we are. And why should we be engaged in this? Why should we bother being a part of interdisciplinary huge teams of scientists and get all the money that goes into climate change research? And I see how the humanities and arts are getting more and more involved. Now in my experience, they're really taking off because I always, take care of meeting them too. There's more interest there. And I found more kind of common ground there to discuss exactly, well, among other things, these issues I'm thinking of here, as being an activist, what does it mean? What can we do? What do we know? Whether anthropology belongs to the social sciences or humanities is not important. I believe we bridge the two and should be in the lead to claim a space in interdisciplinary research. This is where we are good. And now to some concluding remarks, inspired by my informants and students. As a rather newly enrolled anthropologist, lowest down in the hierarchy of my department, I teach 24/7. So my students are my reality, so bear with me. Many of the people in the field, my informants, who lead the work of value and behavior change in sustainability projects and other grassroots initiatives to mitigate and adapt, express fatigue and disillusion towards the usually offered methods of sticks and carrots, economic incentives, small social changes here and there. They don't see it happen fast enough and thoroughly enough. Many talk of the need for an awakening, a spiritual one or even a religious one, at least an awakening in the spirit of a religious one. Otherwise, what little is and will change is too late, too little. They don't see the increase of scientific knowledge and factual information as doing the job. It just piles up, the public getting numb to information, and the time they see they have to make transformation is running out. One informant I had a long collaboration with expressed such fatigue and confessed that he saw only such a fundamental awakening as a solution. This he said after a very long day of meetings, negotiations, and political plotting with me on his tail, when his defenses were down from exhaustion. That's a time of confession. And He's a very experienced businessman who worked in the US for a long time, but thought it would be interesting to spend the last 10 years or so of his working life in a public-private organization established to transform the energy system of a municipality in Denmark to one of zero emission. The formula. But he also said that if his organization sponsors knew what he thought, and that he was talking about a spiritual awakening, he would be in trouble. And we talked about spirits. Nice connections really. He told me how he even had gone from being a liberal conservative businessman to a radical who only saw hope in a total ideological and political transformation of society. And the sponsors would not only withdraw their funding but fire him if they knew. And these are insurance companies, banks, multinational corporations, the municipality, of course, public-private partnership that is, supposed to be the key. Others in my fields have expressed similar thoughts, and this is increasing, and been equally afraid of voicing such concerns. But in our conversations, with a lurking fear and worry for their families, friends, and communities, and these are people in the lead of doing the job, both in research and activism. They hide these very real feelings, playing the game of having everything under control and being the designers and managers of change, which they deep within don't really believe will do the job. Or there is this itch, as I call it. My students are in many cases equally disillusionized and even afraid, and I spend considerable time trying to build up their confidence in the future and offering stories of human survival and success in the face of disasters and tragedies. But more of them are genuinely angry at the system. The older generations, they want to sue us. Politicians, corporations, etc., at themselves for being too dependent on the system and too lazy to transform themselves. It's an identity crisis. But I see among them, and just in my fields in general, activism and disobedience to carbon culture on the rise. And sometimes class dissolves, my class, environmental anthropology for instance, into rows between fractions who see the world in a different light and do not agree on how to solve the problems they face. It's usually the vegetarians and vegans who start. It's really interesting, and they come from all over the world. I have very international crowds of students. And it's a good thing, They take the fight. They don't keep quiet. Interestingly, some of my students have voiced the opinion that the rich part of the world shouldn't feel so safe and think it's able to buy and technologize itself out of climate change and its consequences. They see the poor and marginalized and those who fight and always have fought for their existence through resilience and wit and flexibility as even better off in such a way that they will be more able to adapt when the real and dangerous impacts of climate change are upon us. The West might be able to live in its business-as-usual world for some time, but in the end, it will go down in a big crash. This is what they say. And I'm giving them a voice here. These are the young people who have a future. Having waited too long for, in its illusory security. Thus, my students turn to the marginalized and poor for knowledge and inspiration to respond to climate change, but don't believe in technologies and plan and design fixes of engineering and science. They seek solutions and comfort in the lives of the others. Well, you can call them locals, you can call them indigenous. Science is not the answer. This is an old story, but now we talk about this in the climate change urgency context. This last point has increasingly intrigued me as a slap in the face of the older generations, the scientists and the researchers, the ivory towers. A protest against the mantra of the West saving the rest with its technologies, scientific knowledge and wealth. The pressure on the social and human sciences for their part of answering the question of how to perceive, understand, and react to climate change sometimes worries me, as I don't see that we are responding quickly and thoroughly enough. But at the same time, I am not only unable to take the role of the all-knowing social cultural designer and enforcer of change, even if I am sometimes asked to. by my colleagues, but morally unwilling, and because morally unwilling to do this because it offends my knowledge and experience of what is to be an anthropologist and an activist. If that wasn't clear to me when I started as a PhD student under Hugh's supervision all those years ago, I surely understood it when I walked out of this university with my graduation certificate. The perception and understanding of and reaction to climate change and its effects on our lives is ultimately about human-nature interaction and not just one more business opportunity of neoliberal commodification and privatization of new technical solutions and development aid, where the West saves once more the rest. Thank you for listening.